What's going on, YouTube? This is Acadius, and I'm just making it back after the sickness I mentioned in my last video made its way through my membrane into my inner ear and caused a sudden onset of severe vertigo. After an emergency visit to the hospital, I'm back to finally talk about the recently announced game Light No Fire from Hello Games. What details can we confirm, and what problems does this game face? How could they possibly solve these issues? Let's explore these questions together as we continue to try and peer as much as possible into the future of these games. But first, a quick word about Hello Games. Yes, they had a rough start when they first launched No Man's Sky, and yes, they overpromised and underdelivered. Sure, Sean was a bit confusing when giving out details on No Man's Sky, which led to huge misconceptions about the game. But when you consider that they were a startup company of 4 people that built their company from the ground up and they never sold out to any bigger companies, which allowed them to remain as an independent studio, then you begin to understand their struggles. And when you consider the huge scope of No Man's Sky, then it becomes all the more impressive. And let's not forget how the studio responded to the backlash from the release of No Man's Sky. Did they blame the fans? Did they even blame the graphics card manufacturers? Which has happened, believe me. No, they didn't do any of that, which has become all too common nowadays. They took it on the chin, they owned up to their own failings and acknowledged them. They didn't try and sell us more DLC to get more money while they fixed the game or half-ass fixed it, as it is the most common route nowadays. No, they shut up and then got to work fixing the game to put it in line with player expectations, and there has been many additions and expansions upon the original game since release, but at no point have they tried to charge us more money for any of those. So I say, let's be the better person here. This is a studio that deserves some respect for what they have done without succumbing to the predatory monetary practices that plague so many modern games. Any studio that can fail that spectacularly and never lash out at the fans and never use predatory monetary practices has earned their dues in my book, and I hope you would feel the same. And now, with that out of the way, let's begin by just watching the trailer together, and then we can take a look at what is shown in that trailer and what information they have officially released about the game.
Realization grew on me as quickly as it takes your hand to warm the cold side of the pillow. I'm there for you, you're there for me. I'm the song the soldiers sing as they march outside our window under occupying.
Pretty impressive trailer, if you ask me. So, what information can we glean from this trailer? The opening shot shows four players standing with their backs to the camera. Two of these players are obviously humans, but one is clearly a rabbit, and another is probably some type of ram species based on the horns, but could be some other animal type. So, in the opening shot, we can confirm a playable rabbit race. Then we see the messages: a multiplayer Earth, a procedural Earth, a fantasy Earth, and an unexplored Earth. Now, the scene with the skeletons is interesting here. The big skeleton is just walking along in a generally straight line, no big deal here. But watch the small skeletons and the way they move, not in a straight line, almost as if it's a player controlling them and curving them around, just having some fun. Not sure if they are player controlled though, they still could be NPCs, but interesting either way. Also, the aforementioned messages. The world is said to have been procedurally generated, which is fine by me. I have no problems with procedurally generated maps. But the multiplayer world message can be misleading here. Multiplayer simply means more than one player. Could be 30 players or could be 10,000 players. Without numbers confirmed from the devs, we have no way to know for sure what exactly this means, so let's not get our hopes up just yet. Then we go to a swimming scene where we can clearly see players swimming underwater, and there is other life in the water with them, like fish and a giant squid. From this, we can pretty safely assume that there will be underwater areas to explore. Probably both caves and dungeons will both have underwater versions for players to explore. Next, the player comes out of the water just as another player flies overhead on a mount, and we are shown several different mount types in a flash of screens. One of those is a simple hang glider, and so we can confirm flying mounts and hang gliders. The camera pans around, and we can now see some player house construction that is currently going on. Now, the way the construction works is shown to be something similar to what we are accustomed to. Walls go up in small sections, and it is not currently known if there are any limitations on how big you can make a building or how close to other players you can build. Now, pay attention to the player that is doing the building and the other players walking around. Here we see another rabbit player leave the house, and the player doing the construction looks very much like a pig. Also, the player walking past the tree appears to be some type of bear. So now we can confirm even more player races, as well as typical construction practices that are used in most games. Then a player takes off on a massive bird mount, and then we are treated to another quick flash of screens. But let's take a close look at those screens. They are very cleverly put together to make them resemble each other, but we can see that there is an archer that has fired an explosive arrow, and then there is a warrior that has just used some type of magical sword to cause a similar explosion on enemies. So from this we can confirm different ammo types for bows, and we can confirm magically enhanced swords. We also see some boats, and we will see those and more later in the trailer. Next, the player hops onto what seems to be a wyvern mount and takes off, but in the distance we see some rickety rafts and are treated to some more flashes of screens which show off weather effects and environments. Suddenly, we are going over the same mountain that was in the distance, and now we can see a floating island as well as some pretty realistic looking clouds in the background. The scene changes, and now we have a torch-holding character that is approaching a very large being that seems to be futuristic and/or alien. From this, we should assume that this being has something to do with the enemies in the world. We don't know for sure, but it's a safe bet in my opinion. Then we follow a player with deer-like antlers that is riding on a ground mount. So along with flying mounts confirmed, it was obvious, we can also confirm ground mounts as well as a deer-like playable race. The scene switches again, and now we are following 4 players: a rabbit, a bear, what appears to be a badger, and a human. So those are more races confirmed, and there are more rabbits kneeling in front of those players as they proceed down the walkway towards the building in the background. Since we can see as the rabbit players kneel, we can confirm that there is some type of working emote system in the game already. One interesting point here isn't actually the giant NPC off to your left. It's the fact that the rabbit player appears to have a shield on its back, and in the background we see that same item being used as decoration on the walls of the building they're walking towards. Then we shift back to more flying until we see a giant ominous orb with intricate designs on it. I can only assume that this orb will have something to do with the alien we saw earlier, probably the typical trope of an ancient alien race, and now we are starting to slowly uncover hidden truths about them. We have seen similar stuff from Destiny 1 and 2 and also New World. I hope I am wrong here, but it honestly looks like this is the way they are going with the game. And in the last scene, we see a mountain break away to reveal what some have claimed to be volcanic rock, but I say differently. This to me is not volcanic rock. It doesn't move like magma, and there is no magma bursting forth from the exposed red rock. I think this is something more similar to the corruption we saw in New World. A lot of games seem to be taking this odd corruption route. It always comes off as a bit bland to me ever since New World. So I think this rock breaking away symbolizes the underlying corruption that is going on in the world just under the surface. But that's just me guessing. It could just simply be a cool looking lead into the game's splash art. Who knows? But now that we have picked most of the trailer apart, let's take a look at what the devs have officially said about the game. If we take a look at the Steam page, then we can get the most information about the game, so let's have a read. A multiplayer Earth. Carve a life together, meet players from across the globe, build a life, explore and survive together. Construct persistent buildings and communities, or strike out alone to discover the world for others. So, meet players from across the globe, construct persistent communities, or strike out alone. These are great lines. This is what gets fans of these types of games hyped up, and if they follow through with their promises, fans of these games should absolutely be excited. And to top it all off, we have never seen all of these elements in an MMO type game before, assuming this is actually an MMO, like some people are trying to say that it is. But the Steam page only claims that it's a single player or online co-op game. There is no mention that I have found that this game is an MMO, so without official confirmation on player numbers or the devs admitting that, yeah, it's an MMO, it's just irresponsible to call it an MMO. Next, we have a procedural Earth, a truly open world with no boundaries at a scale never attempted before. A massively varied and dense planet filled with immersive biomes, unique enemies, and valuable resources to discover. Here, the devs are claiming that the world has no boundaries, and it will be on a scale that has never been attempted before. We have seen worlds with seemingly no boundaries, but every world does have its limits. Even Minecraft was procedurally generated and still had limits. Its reference to no boundaries is probably just them trying to say there are no invisible barriers that prevents players from entering an area. Everything can be freely explored. The claim that it is on a scale never attempted before is certainly valid here. Hello Games have already accomplished what everyone thought was impossible, especially for a studio of their size, when they released No Man's Sky, and it seems they aim to do the same thing again with this game. No game has truly attempted to create a world this massive for a lot of reasons. How do you keep things interesting? A playable space this massive cannot possibly be handcrafted everywhere. And of course, typically you find that handcrafted content in a game usually equates to higher quality standards, more entertainment for the player. So the less handcrafted content you have in the game, then usually the more sameness that you wind up having, and everything winds up just being more of the same and more of the same. Then we have A Fantasy Earth. Light No Fire presents you with an ancient Earth to uncover, one where you're not the hero, thick with lore, mystery, and a constant fight for survival, inspired by the adventure, charm, and imagination that we love from classic fantasy. The best bit here is that it states that you aren't the hero. Too many games have you set as the hero, the chosen one, the savior of the world. But then you have all your buddies with you, and they are also the hero and the chosen one. This makes no sense. And not everyone wants to be a hero. Some people just want to be a regular Joe, an average person accomplishing extraordinary things. So it's good to see some devs not going the hero route for once. So, what are some issues that we can foresee that this game will have to overcome? Well, if we look at the About This Game section, then we will see that the devs are claiming that the game takes place on a fantasy planet the size of Earth. And at first, this may seem good. Indeed, the idea of it is awesome to think about, but it definitely presents some issues. If you have a world of that scale, how does anyone find the cities in the world? How do they travel from one place to another? No one wants to travel for weeks to go from America to the UK on the back of a flying mount. That is just boring gameplay. So this means they have to have some type of fast travel mode in mind, maybe several different types working together. The fast travel modes in Ultima Online comes to mind because it's easy to imagine how to go from point A, your house, to point B, a city of your choosing, by way of a gate travel spell. But how do you get back to point A, your house that was built in a random spot out in the wilderness? And remember, this travel method can't take too long or players are going to complain. The best system I can imagine would be UO's recall and gate spells, which allowed you to cast the mark spell on a rune at a location and then cast either the recall or gate spells to instantly travel to the location you marked the rune at. You could also make use of the mini moon gates, which would allow you to teleport to different locations around the world in order to shorten your travel time. The other issue here that I have is the animal-based races themselves. Sure, I can get behind the rabbit race, but then we have deer, bears, badgers, rams, pigs. At what point does it get to be too much of more of the same? Have the devs been reading far too much of Alice in Wonderland? It's a great book, but I wouldn't want to base an MMO-esque type of project on it. The sheer amount of animal races shown in the trailer is very concerning. I can only hope that there will be other races available that aren't just overgrown animals. Let's hope that those skeletons I pointed out do turn out to be another playable race. So, that's my thoughts on Light No Fire, but what were yours? Is there something that I missed that you felt was important? Let me know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.